and welcome. Thank you very much. I always enjoy watching that lovely slideshow. So good morning to everybody, and welcome. I see that we already have, I think, 54 people on the chat so far, and I'm sure that more participants will be joining us. I just want to comment on how in many ways I dread day-long Zoom meetings for reasons which will be obvious to everybody, but how much I enjoyed yesterday. And I think we've really got quite far with, as people were mentioning, with actually using the platform to really get into interesting discussions. And I'm sure that we're going to have the same today. So thank you very much to all the organizers and everybody who's participating for a great day yesterday. And I'm really looking forward to today. I did talk briefly yesterday, but for people who don't know me, my name's Leslie Swartz, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the South African Journal of Science. My day job is at the Department of Psychology at Stellenbosch University, and I'm going to be chairing the morning session, which is something I'm very pleased to do. And it's such an easy job because you've got such a fantastic lineup, and I know that there's going to be a lot of interest in what we have today. Please, let's just follow the etiquette of yesterday, please. So if you're not speaking, please mute yourself and turn off your camera. Please feel free to use the chat. I always have to remind people that at my age of life, I'm very much not a digital native. So if I struggle to find out what's in the chat, or when people are putting up their hands and so on, please just jump in and assist me, because I know that there are lots of people who are better at these sorts of things than I am. But let's get straight into it for today. So the morning we're going to have two really interesting and very important presentations. The first one is going to be on predatory academic journals and conferences, which is the bane of all of our lives. I opened my email this morning when I was working, and there, as ever, were all my invitations to, please send this and that to our esteemed journal, and we are begging for this, and it's going to be all of the sort of things that I'm sure are going to be spoken about. And then the really difficult and vexed issue after tea that after the Q&A that we're going to be talking about, which is the question of research quality. And we're very lucky to have people who've been working tirelessly on that. It's easy to count things, but quality is much more difficult. So our first presentation, I'm not sure how the three presenters are going to be organizing yourselves. And I see, hello, Stefan, I'm not sure whether you're the person who's going to be starting, but it's going to be on combating predatory academic journals and conferences. And according to our program, we have three presenters, or I'm not sure who's presenting, but you have a team of three people. Asfawossen Asrat is Professor of Geology at Botswana International University of Science and Technology, and is closely affiliated with Addis Ababa University in Ethiopia. And he's co-editor-in-chief of Earth Science Reviews and editor of Scientific Africa, which are both Elsevier journals. And he's worked very hard to improve the status of Ethiopian journals. And he's one of the three authors of the Ethiopian Academy of Sciences study entitled National Journal Evaluation and Accreditation, a strategy for standardizing the assessment of performance in scholarly publishing in Ethiopia. So he has exactly the background that we need. That was published in 2017. Stefan Erickson is Associate Professor and Senior Lecturer in Research Ethics at Uppsala University, and he's Director of their Center for Research Ethics and Bioethics, and he's also been appointed advisor to the Vice Chancellor of that university for good research practice. And anybody who works in the field of publication ethics will know and admire his name. And the third contributor is our own Susan Veldsman, who is the Director of Scholarly Publishing at ASAF, who is well known to this audience and without whom I certainly would not be able to do my job. How she manages to do hers is a separate question. But you will have, it's now exactly 9:35. You'll have approximately half an hour for your presentation, and then we'll have some Q&A. So I think, Stefan, it looks like you're starting. You did share your screen, but it's now been unshared as far as I know.
No, thank you. But I think it's
over to you,
Susan.
and we're looking forward to this. Yeah.
I think it's Susan who shares, and we'll start off this.
Okay,
these talks.
No problem.
Yeah.
No problem.
Good morning, Leslie. Good morning, colleagues. I'm absolutely delighted to be here this morning and to share sort of this platform with two of my esteemed colleagues, namely Professor Stefan Erickson and Professor Asrat. I've had close connections with both of them. Stefan, I've learned the last 2 years we've worked together on this particular project. And then Asfa, as you've heard, has also done pretty much the same study that we did in South Africa. And we worked very closely with the Ethiopian Academy of Sciences for the evaluation of the journals. So I think it will be very interesting to this group just to sort of make the connections, etc. Also on this call, I must acknowledge her is Dr. Tracy Elliott, who is sort of the project manager and leading this particular work that we will be talking about this morning. I just want to try and share my screen. It seems that I have the same problem that I had yesterday, and I'm not sure why, and I'm so frustrated. If it does that, is that better now? Yes, it does seem so.
It looks perfect to me.
Okay, fantastic, because yesterday I spent just about an hour just to get my PowerPoint in the right mode. So thank you very much for this. I just want to remind colleagues and editors within South Africa is that NSEF has also done its own studies on the predatory phenomena in South Africa specifically. In our previous study, 12 years for academic of scholarly publishing in South Africa, we looked at all the bibliometric analysis of where South African researchers publish and what do they do and how do the journals look like, what profile do they have, etc., etc. And then we came across the fact that South African researchers are also embarking on predatory activities as such. Although the percentage was low over a 10-year period, there was still this percentage that sort of signaled to us that this is actually quite problematic, and it's still growing. And we could hear from Professor Maton in the second discussion this morning. But I think the thing that worried us most is that from our researchers that they are actually starting to engage in sort of unethical practices, which is also most concerning. And then what is the difference between a predatory activity and an unethical activity? And you will see in this presentation this morning, in our work that we did internationally, it was actually very difficult to sort of draw a very fine line between them. And you will see, and Stefan will mostly speak about that, is how did we sort of classify these activities of researchers, and it's most concerning. I think one of the things that do cross the minds, I hope, of researchers and editors in South Africa is it just pertaining to South Africa, and especially us in the developing countries. We sometimes get blamed that we are responsible for most of the activities in the predatory fields, etc. But is that true? I think that's the one question I want to ask. And then secondly, how wide is this phenomena happening in the rest of the world? That's the one thing. But the other thing that really came to a light, and we had many discussions within our group, is what about conferences? We were sort of contemplating, should we have it in, should we not have it in? But fortunately, in our proposal to the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, we specifically stated that conferences will be included. So it really forced us to also look at that critically. Strangely enough, or interestingly enough, there's not much published on predatory conferences as such. But as you know, our research output policy also accredits our conferences and gives subsidies to universities for participation and publishing in conference proceedings. So for us, it really signaled, as we started to drill down more into the the whole problem, we did see that there was particular behavior associated with conferences. And now with the pandemic, will that behavior change? Will it put on another coat to blemish itself then sort of against sort of what we already know so far? It still remains some interesting questions. And colleagues, I really hope that you will enjoy our discussion. We will do this as a combined presentation. And we are so cute here. We know exactly when to hand over to each other. So Leslie, not to worry. We've got this, and we will hand over to each other as we proceed through this presentation. And now I just have another problem, and now I can't advance on my slides. I don't know what is it on my side. I'm so sorry. I'm just going to stop sharing for a minute and just see what's going on here. It's most frustrating, I must say. Leslie, can you see that?
Yeah, yes, and we can see your second slide.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm so relieved that this is now being solved, and I'm sorry about that. So what we're dealing with and what we'll cover in today's discussion is then just a little bit about our IAP study and its objectives, introducing predatory journals and conferences, sort of common features and indicators between the two of these issues. Why is it important to address them? We will speak about our global survey that we conducted, the resources and tools to identify them, and then, of course, some recommendations for publishers and libraries, which is very specific to this group. And again, now I can't advance. I want to go mad. I'm just wondering what I should do now.
Susan, have you tried the down arrow or the right arrow on your keyboard?
Okay, let's do that. No, it doesn't want to advance. That's very frustrating. I had different problems yesterday, and today I have a new set of problems. I'm so sorry. Let's just...
Okay. To the left of your PowerPoint itself, at the bottom, if you hover your mouse in the left and bottom corner, there's some tools there.
You see, I cannot see those tools.
It's
but there you go.
Yes,
That appeared now. There you go. Thank you for that advice. I thought I'm quite technical savvy, Leslie, but I'm not. You complain about yourself, but I'm definitely.
You don't know how relieved I am.
Thank you so much. Right, so let's proceed. So 2 years ago, we started with a study, and as I indicated, it is funded by the Betty and Gordon Moore Foundation, which we are very grateful for. I must say the pandemic did bring its own challenges in how we advanced the study, but I think we managed well. I think the main thrust of this of the study was really is if we do not look at this problem, what will happen to it? If we don't raise the profile of what researchers engage themselves to, what will be the future then, and how would it look? We certainly, right from our start, said that it's really tainting research in its entirety, and if it goes unnoticed, well, it's really problematic, and we should make sort of researchers worldwide aware of what's happening and the behavior of these publishers, authors, whatever. It comes from all sorts of fronts that we have to be careful of where it does come from. Just to introduce you to the working group, you can see it runs really internationally. We have people, as you've heard, from Ethiopia, from Sweden, from Egypt, from India, from the UK, from Malaysia, and it goes on and on. From South America, you can see it really represents quite a broad group of experts in this field coming together and investigating this phenomenon. So what were our study objectives? We looked at how will we define predatory and unethical practices in academic journals and conferences. And that was really, for me personally, a very interesting part because, as said in my introductory word, is that we found that it was actually there a fine line between these different activities, and how do you distinguish the one from the other? We also had to gauge what is the extent of these practices and what is the impact on research in its entirety, to understand the root causes. So what are the drivers to instigate this behavior? And then examine the efforts to date to combat these predatory journals and conferences around the world, and then to provide concrete recommendations for addressing the problem, and also providing the recommendations for different sectors in what we're actually doing, which we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And you can see on the right-hand side, it stretches from policymakers, universities, public and private sector funders, publishers, libraries, and then the research community and academies. You can see it actually stretches upon a very, very large stakeholder group. So I might not tell you something new, but just to reiterate and to confirm that the common features of predatory journals and conferences is they solicit articles from researchers through practices that exploits the researchers to publish and to present their work. And the features of the predatory includes, but are definitely not limited to, so many days, so many new tricks up their sleeves, but definitely rapid pay to publish present models without rigorous peer review, fake editorial or conference boards, falsely listing respected scientists, fraudulent impact factors or metrics, journal and conference titles that are deceptively similar to legitimate ones, and aggressive spam invitations to solicit articles and abstracts, including outside or even inside own expertise. But these genuinely fraudulent practices evolve, as I've said before, and are becoming more difficult to distinguish between low quality, unethical, and questionable practices. And you will see more about this coming on later. And then this is a very good time that I introduce my colleague, Asfawossen. Asfa, please put on your video, and over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. Good morning, everyone. So I'll take you through the, next some slides on the landmark survey that we conducted on predatory academic practice. So we did this in order to gauge the impact of predatory practice, and this survey is probably the largest survey, as far as we know, of its kind on this important topic. And it was a global landmark survey of researchers in all disciplines and in all or at all career stages and in any country. Next slide, please. Thank you. Well, over 1,800 researchers from 112 countries responded, providing a rich data set for analysis, and all major geographic regions of the world are represented, as you can see from this picture here. And all disciplines and career stages were also represented. And just over half of the respondents were members or alumni of academies. And if you participated in this survey, thank you very much, because we got a great deal of information from this survey. And the data show very clear trends. Over 80% of respondents perceive that predatory journals and conference rather are already a serious problem, or they think that they are on the rise in their country of work. And over 90%, this is a huge number, indicated that something needs to be done about them for two main reasons. And one of the reasons they indicated, most of the respondents indicated, is that this should be combated so that we can preserve the integrity of research and public trust in it. And secondly, to ensure that research informing policy is rigorous. Next slide. And what's interesting is nearly a quarter of the respondents, about 24% of them, have either published in a predatory journal. This is a very, interesting result and surprising at that. And or participated in a predatory conference. About 14% of them said that, or do not know if they have either published or participated in predatory conference journals and conference respectively, and 10% of them said that. And when asked why they did this, the main reasons, that they were involved somehow in this predatory practice, the main reasons were lack of awareness or needing to advance their career, or convenience, because they think that it's more faster or cheaper or easier, or all at the same time, to be involved in this predatory practice, and of course pressure from their peers. And this is very interesting because this highlights the need for systematic and institutional change to reduce perverse incentives for this predatory practice and improve legitimate publishing practice, and of course prevent the normalization or institutionalization of this practice. Next slide, please. And here are some of the reasons respondents feel strongly that efforts must be made to combat this pervasive predatory practice. And the majority of the respondents are concerned about poor or inaccurate research fueling misinformation in public policy. And this is very interesting now, because probably this has been also becoming to a stark relief because of the COVID-19 and all things that have come about because of that. And the next highest, about 69 and 58% of respondents' concerns are undermining the research enterprise as a whole, obviously, not least public trust in it, and widening the gap still further between high and low income countries. Next slide, please. Well, there are also other interesting results of this survey, and this include that predatory journals and conferences may have infiltrated a wide demographic of researchers than previously thought, because the idea was that probably only those in low-income countries and only those who are at the level of their, at the earliest level of their career stage or early career researchers are affected by this. But the results show that actually researchers at all career stages are somehow affected, and those researchers, especially in low and middle income countries, and in some disciplines, as you can see on the slide here, are affected more than others. And a significant proportion of respondents have admitted that they have published in a predatory journal or participated in a predatory conference, and the large majority said that this is unknowingly. And using the 14% figure as a conservative estimate, and that means those who admitted that they have participated or they have published in predatory conference and publications or journals. And the survey sample has a rough proxy for the global research community of around 9 million researchers. A conservative estimate gives about 1.2 million researchers and billions of dollars invested research costs based on figures in the latest report of UNESCO, the latest UNESCO science report that came out in just recently in 2021. And this is, all this shows that this is not a trivial or marginal issue. It requires a really urgent attention. So what can you do about this? Well, I'll pass you now to Stefan, who will take us through the next section of the talk, which answers this and other questions. Stefan, over to you.
Thank you. In light of what Asfawossen has spoken about here, is one of the major issues, of course, is that how are we to characterize predatory journals, define them or mark them so that the academic community can avoid such publishers as far as possible. In our survey, the respondents highlighted 4 markers of a predatory journal, all with the focus on the invitations to publish that they spam you with. More than 80% of the respondents said that these are typical features. The invitation to submit the paper is in a subject outside your own expertise. Like I recently got one for internal medicine, even though I'm a research ethicist. The conference or journal has an unusual combination of words in the name. The invitation is often unfocused, has odd language, and it can be very flattering, overly so. And they keep sending you invitations. They spam you all the time. So, of course, this is good, but it's only a focus on the invitations, and we must look at much more than that. So there's a range of what we could call self-help resources already available online, and here's a few of them collected for you. There are these where you can learn about how to spot them, like Think, Check, Submit for journals and Think, Check, Attend for conferences. There are lists of good journals, for example, Director of Open Access journals. It might be a list of the predatory ones, like Cabell's is offering. This is, however, a prescription service, so it's rather costly, but it's very good, I think. So we have quite a few of these. We could take next, please. One kind of one-stop shop of resources on predatory journals has been submitted online by the Ottawa Health Research Institute, perhaps the group that does the most of research on predatory journals and so in the world now. If you click on information for researchers, for example, there is a series of useful short YouTube videos that describe predatory journals and so on. They are also very famous because they, a few years back, created a consensus definition of predatory journals, and it sort of stated the core problem as predatory journals and publishers are entities that prioritize self-interest at the expense of scholarship. There were, however, some limitations to this approach, as they just then very sort of in a very general way try to put forth a few markers of predatoriness, if we speak about it like that. And they didn't, for example, mention the major problem that most people think predatory journals present, that it's not peer-reviewed and that they don't have that they lack proper peer review. So we have thought long and hard about how to define predatory journals, publishers, and conferences. So we'll look at the next slide here. So our idea is to speak about the spectrum and rather start, instead of speaking of, like we say here, predatory journals, we should speak about predatory practices. So the idea would be to, instead of speaking about predatory journals and publishers as entities that prioritize self-interest at the expense of scholarship, we would rather speak about predatory practices, which are practices that prioritize self-interest at the expense of scholarship. This makes it possible to have certain distinctions in place. One is between, if we don't get everything under the umbrella term of predatory, you can sort of start to distinguish between, for example, deceptive and fraudulent journals and low quality ones. So if you look at, and you could also say that you could distinguish between various kinds of low quality. I mean, if you speak about predatory as a big term, it's everything is condemned in that sense, but maybe there are low quality journals that are not do not have bad intent at all, but are rather well-meaning and is rather in need of support because the low quality comes from poor resources or not being very experienced in academic publishing. So those might better be served by us supporting them in various ways. It also makes it possible to say that predatory practices might be sometimes present in what we think of as quality journals. So they might sometimes also prioritize their self-interest rather than scholarship. So this is the spectrum then that is the result of this thinking. So at the very left you have the worst ones, those that commit internet fraud of various kinds. So you might hijack a journal or have a phishing. They are out to steal your money, basically. Deceptive journals are the ones that lies about some things, like where the editorial office is, who is an editor, about the cost to publish with them, that they have a peer review, while they don't have that, false impact figures, and so on. So you could say that typical markers here, it's enough to have one of these markers to be a fraudulent or deceptive journal. And of course, we should always stay clear from these journals all the time. But we should also stay clear of the unacceptably low quality journals, where you have many low quality markers present. Here you have low quality peer review, not very good editorial practices, the services are lacking or poor, spamming, and so on. Nothing of these markers make them into deceptive or fraudulent, but they are so low quality that we should stay clear of them, so they are really in the red. And then you can go, there's a bit less markers in a low quality journal, promising low quality journal. You see that they want to try and be good, and that there's still some low quality markers present, and we should try to get them in shape. Quality journals might sometimes fall down into questionable quality, and what makes a quality journal is that they serve scholarly communication by addressing the critique they will receive and try to solve this. But some journals, so that's a more transitional category, you could say. The hope is that the quality journal will soon stop being of questionable quality, or perhaps they will slide down into lower quality, which sometimes happens as well. So we should try to get people to go as far to the right as possible, of course. Next slide, please. So thinking about conferences, there is so much less done about conference in the literature and in the empirical research being performed. But we have tried to make a similar spectra regarding conferences. So here you can, to the left, find the fake or criminal conferences, the deceptive ones lying about their true intent of who should take part and what kind of quality it is. And again, the unacceptably low quality in some promising low quality conference, questionable and quality conferences. Typical markers of the fake or deceptive ones are that if they are really criminal, they won't even take place. They might use their webpage for fraudulent purposes, like the journals. The deceptive ones falsely claims about having distinguished speakers, about what they will publish after the conference or other things, or deceive about the costs. Typical markers of the low quality ones are that they have very many conferences, not really in service of science, and you meet people from all various fields of science, not really clear about what you are doing listening to them. And the quality conferences are, of course, serving scholarly communication and scientific rigor in a much, much better way. You are clear about conference cost, you follow various good practices for conferences, thorough peer review, and it's a reputable organization standing behind it. So this is the tool that we have now produced and hope will be more in service of distinguishing various kinds of journals and conferences and being a bit more nuanced in dealing with the various qualities of them. Thank you. I think we now go back to and end this with some recommendations for what we can do that Asfa will speak about.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. Yeah, I mean, I think we are a bit late in time, but I'll try to take the next couple of minutes or a bit more to just tell you some of, or highlight some of the recommendations that we developed for the publishing, the publishers and the libraries and indexing service. Well, we developed, in this project, we developed sets of recommendations for all the stakeholders that Stefan indicated at the beginning, but here I'll just confine myself to the publishers and the the library service, library and indexing service. And I would like to also indicate that, I mean, these recommendations are still a work in progress, and your insights will be very, very much welcome here. So we believe that the publishing industry, whether commercial or not for-profit, drives much of the systemic exclusivity and bias, and they and actors promoting alternative publishing models also have a vital role to play in transforming scientific publishing, resetting peer review process, and of course in defining fairer, more inclusive models for academic publishing. So I'll just highlight some of these recommendations. So the first is waive processing charge to publish, article processing charge to publish in open access journals for all researchers in low-income countries. We believe that this will help enhance global equity and inclusion in publishing. Then dismantle the author pays or pay-to-publish model and consider alternative co-funding models. Here we could, I mean, consider subscribe to open, diamond, open access, and so on as, I mean, examples of this, this model. Then avoid proliferating numbers and issues of journals. And have an open and transparent policy on predatory journals and the rationale for retracting papers. Then implement transparent peer review policies and process. And a good example could be the recent initiative by PLOS in their PLOS preprint commenting pilot. There is, I mean, a link if you are interested that I'll put in the chat later on if you want to follow up with that. And facilitate quality over quantity of papers through rigorous refereeing and review process and exploring ways of incentivizing editors and reviewers. We think this is something that can be also followed up during this discussion, but we think that incentivizing editors and reviewers might be one of the ways that we can follow. Next slide, please. Well, similarly, the libraries and indexing service, which are working at the research publishing interface, have a vital role to play in promoting good practice and identifying fraudulent ones, and making it easier, of course, for researchers, funders, and publishers alike to navigate the system. So some of the recommendations that we think are, I mean, useful include the following. So one is providing training and raising awareness of predatory journals for library and indexing service staff. Then conducting periodic reviews and strengthening the criteria for the incorporation of journals on their database, and use cabals and similar service to check your own list of journals. Again, we can follow this up during the discussion. I was looking at the chat about bill and so on. So this might be an interesting point to follow up later. Then work as a global consortium to produce a not-for-profit global list. Here, there is a very interesting precedent in Latin America, which is called the Latin Index Catalog, which sets minimum standards of quality and practice and promotes their compliance. So this could be kind of followed up in other parts of the world because this is a good practice. Then offer professional training for doctoral students and early career researchers, obviously emphasizing the norms and conventions of peer-reviewed journal publication, highlighting the features of predatory and low-quality outlets as a means of avoiding them, and so on. And again, as a good practice, libraries need to mark articles in their own bibliographies when they have appeared in disputed journals. So oftentimes the papers might be fine, but the journals are dubious. So librarians have to, I mean, kind of flag these kinds of publications or journals, and then share their experience on predatory publishing with other library and indexing service, and develop common tools to improve coherence. And this could be effected through library associations and so on. And for the indexing service particularly, try to have 2 layers in the index or in their index. One being a comprehensive, that means trying to cover everything, and another more selective where the predatory ones are omitted. So this double layer will somehow be able to kind of, identify the predatory journals in practice. And finally, advise university press and their editors on best practice on scholarly publishing. So these are some of the major recommendations that we think are important or useful for publishers and for library service and indexers. Well, finally, next slide. I think it's my final slide. You can follow the project using this link, the link that's indicated here, and you can get in touch with the secretariat on the indicated email. And I have recognized that Tracy, the project manager, is here, and I'm sure we can also involve her as well as the presenters as during the discussion. And I'd like to thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all of our presenters for that. This is a really important issue, and it doesn't go away. It just seems to get more and more complicated. But thank you for all the work that you've done on this. We have about just over 10-15 minutes for discussion. I know that I have some questions and issues, but I'd like to not abuse the chair. And maybe just to kick us off, I mean, I think there was a comment in the chat from Tillman. Would you like to discuss that with the presenters?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I think once again, I think this is what we all know, that the problem of predatory research and publication is a hydra with many heads. That's why it's so difficult to get rid of it, because it works, it functions to a great extent thanks to the internet. If once you identified one predatory publication, journal, or conference organization, then they can easily close down and they reappear in a different guise. So yes, I think, and I want to thank the previous presenters for very interesting presentation. The struggle against predatory culture must also take place at different levels, at the individual level, appealing to people, also educating people, because often I observe there's a lot of confusion about this, especially among young researchers who are quite confused by this plethora of publications, not knowing really what is a valuable established journal and what is not. On the other hand, I also think that this is a problem for academic culture on the whole, because if university administrators and managers shrug their shoulders when they are presented with CVs that contain the one or other predatory publication, or if they tend to overlook such dubious publications when scholars, colleagues apply for promotion, then that is a real problem. So I think it has affected all layers of academia, and that's why one probably has to develop rolling campaigns that never stop and find the right way to address the recipients. In order to hammer home the message. But I also see it very much as a problem of academic administration and management. Thank you.
Thank you. Possibly just before, if there are responses from the authors to Tillman, Kirsten Krause has been sharing quite a lot of very useful links and materials in the chat. So thank you very much. Kirsten, I don't know if you want to talk about some of your experience just in response to the presentations.
Yes, thank you, Leslie. Yes, I'm from the Electronic Journal of Information Systems in developing countries. And we started using Fidelio as a tool to help flag questionable citations used in manuscripts. We are still busy, experimenting with the idea, but we actually find quite useful. To just give you an indication, we scanned the entire 2017 list of publications. So, cutting and pasting all the references into a text document and scanned it. It's about 102 pages, and we got over 90 flags, only from DOAJ removed. Now, the Fidelio tool actually incorporates about 7 lists of so-called, it's predatory, it's removed, it's questionable, it's a range of things. They call it orange lists. So we found that quite useful. And we also, there was one instance, just to give you an idea, one instance where an author submitted a paper and there was a single flag. And the flags, was, I can't remember exactly when, but the editor-in-chief said, we can simply just remove this. I said, well, let's look at what the title does to the research itself. And it actually turned out that the title that was used in the list of references informed an entire section of the research instrument. So basically, even though there was just one instance in the list of references, it actually affected most of the claims in this paper. So the author had to go back and revisit the entire research. But we found the tool to be quite useful.
Thank you. Are there comments from our speakers on the use of these tools and on the points made by Tillman? Stefan, I see you. Your hand is up. Go for it.
Yeah,
and then Kobus, I'll come to you afterwards. Yeah,
I think that was a very good suggestion, and I know that a couple of those that are making these plagiarism tools. Like in Sweden, we have Urkund Origin now, and there's others, and they sort of planning and working with getting flags up for references to journals that are in these lists. And I think that would be very helpful if we could sort of stop the use of these in their tracks, so that people just get the notion of it being not good quality. Yeah. So, I mean, you don't have to embarrass them with reporting them for misconduct or anything, but just say that it's not good enough. You can't have these references, and that would soon be part of the methodology of a good researcher. And that's one important way of combating this, I think.
Thank you. Thank you. Kobus, I see your hand was up, and then we'll come back to Kirsten if we have time.
Thank you very much. I think this was a fascinating presentation, very valuable to the students. I see one major problem, that is that you've got a sliding scale. I mean, if there were a real cutoff that you said this would be predatory journal, what Jeff would be able to do, then I think that would have helped very much. But I think the value of this presentation, it just shows you how insipid this whole situation is. I mean, what people don't realize, I think someone just mentioned it to a slight degree, is that it's also unethical to remove a publication from your list of publication if that was in a predatory journal. So we have to be extremely careful for our own careers, but the biggest problem is what it does to the science as a whole when we can't trust what people have published. Thank you for an excellent presentation.
Thank you. Susan, do you want to respond? Sorry, I think your hand's been up for ages and I didn't see it.
No, not really, but let me respond, and I would like to invite Stefan again also to respond on this issue. I think this is a very important point being raised, and I think the fact that we have sort of put predatory practices over a spectrum actually, I think must come home to us. We've been busy as ASIF with this peer review of the journals now for over 12 years. We're coming to an end to that now, and I'm busy as part of a study to analyze what are the typical recommendations the peer reviewers made to journals. What is there a pattern? And I'm afraid at this point in time, we can see that some of our journals are very low quality and not really following international standards. And I hope that the spectrum approach sort of really raises our concern that if you're in a very low quality, not adhering to international practices, the risks that you are taking to actually then be branded or being upscaled to sort of a very deceitful, very, very low quality journal as such. So I just want to impress again then on editors to really to take notice of this spectrum approach of activities. And as I said, you know, there's a very fine line from the one activity to the other. And we as editors must actually distinguish ourselves. Why are we being considered as a good journal following international standards? I mean, following international standards is very technical in the sense of your web layout, for instance, or what you declare and what is your policies, the governance of your journal, to be upfront and open about it. So it's also about openness of how you actually run your journal. So I just want to emphasize that again. Thank you, Leslie, over to you.
Thank you, thanks. I just wanted to thank Tracy, who's just shared the link to your draft report, which will be published in 2022. That's very useful. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think, Asfa, you had a response. I haven't forgotten about you, Kirsten.
Yeah, well, I just want to recognize the questions which are being raised and also very interesting questions in the chat box. Well, in this presentation, we were just very much confined to the recommendations to publishers, considering the audience and library service. But we have a whole set of recommendations for, researchers, all the stakeholders that were presented at the beginning. And there was one question in the chat box about that. So in this draft report that Tracy has shared, you will definitely find those recommendations. That's one. The second is, yes, the root cause, probably addressing the root cause is what makes our report or our study much different from the other works that have been done on this. So we address the root cause in a very, very detailed manner in this study and in this report. I don't think we have time to go to those, but one of the major root causes that we consider, obviously, that was also referred to by one of the, the persons who addressed the question at the beginning, is this institutional setting, the academic environment itself. So we have a very detailed information on that on this draft report that we couldn't address in this very short period of time. So I just want to, emphasize that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, all of us as editors have a lot of work to do because we've all got to get on top of this. And that's partly why I like this spectrum idea, because, you know, it's very easy to say, those are the predatory people, but actually what you're saying is this is relevant to all of us. Sorry, Kirsten, I've kept you waiting. I think you wanted to respond to the response.
Actually, I want to respond to two things. The one is the root cause issue. You know, you sit with a conundrum on the one side, you know, we need science and we need reliable science, but on the other side, there's a tremendous push, and I think the presenters mentioned that, you know, to publish or perish, and it becomes a sort of a publication culture where instead of teaching our students, you know, the importance of curiosity and science, integrity in science, we teach them that, you know, publish or perish. It's almost like, you know, the wrong value system. So that is something really to look at, and then. And I think, you know, if we have a sort of a value-based approach to the way we engage with emerging researchers, teach them that this is not about getting the numbers or getting the H-index right and that sort of thing, but it's about getting science out there that get people really talking, that's got a real practical impact. So you get a lot of rigorous rubbish, you know, this is also what we see. Now, this is my first comment. The second comment was on, you know, the embarrassing of the author. I think, Stefan, you mentioned that, you know, author submits a manuscript and then a title is flagged. And it just brings back to how we use a Fidelio report. Fidelio report is quite similar to a Turnitin report. If you get, let's say you submit your manuscript or a thesis or whatever, a Turnitin report will give you similarity. It's not plagiarism. That report needs to be interpreted. And the same goes for the Fidelio report, because what it does is it combines a variety of tools, actually looking at a spectrum, you know, right from the very green side where you've got rated and ranked titles, you know, like the ABDC list, right towards the other side where you've got the old Beals list also included. So it flags areas of concern. What then should happen is the editor or the supervisor or the ethics review board needs to go and delve into those instances and see what is the impact. Why did the person use it? How did the person actually use it in the lit review? And often what, you know, my experience is it flags writing style issues. For example, emerging writers would typically write author-driven. So they will say author one, and they would write an entire paragraph on this. And I'm not talking as a supervisor. Entire paragraph based on one author's position. So if that author is a potential predatory author, you know, then you actually then flag issues around the way the student write, because how the student should write is actually claims-driven or arguments-driven. And in a very big way, this using this report actually started highlighting quality writing also in the way we use it to interpret, you know, the possibility of questionable science in the manuscripts that got submitted.
Thank you, Chris. I mean, I think what your comments emphasize actually will take us into the questions that we're going to be discussing later, which is the broader issue of research quality. Clearly, there's so much to discuss, and I want to thank all of our speakers. And I haven't been able to deal with everything in the chat, but please do look at all the comments in the chat. There's just one set of comments that I think might, very briefly, Neil Eccles, would you like to just say something about what you put in the chat before we have a little comfort break?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, so two of my questions were sort of addressed regarding the root causes, because I think that's important, and particularly in relation to this supposed vulnerability of developing countries. I'm always very alert to declarations, you know, like Fanonian declarations. The native is declared insensible to ethics. You know, that for me is always a red flag. So those have been sort of discussed, but I do wonder whether the global hegemony of what's interesting pushes developing or low and middle income authors into predatory spaces, because that's the only place where there's curiosity about their journal. So that's something. I mean, my other question is perhaps more general, and it's easy for us to reflect on things which have been identified as predatory, but in so many ways the entire publication game is predatory. I mean, you know, there's so many things which supposedly reputable publishers do, but actually they're only in it for money. And we as editors, I think we try and sustain an academic spirit or an academic culture, but we're operating within the context of you know, multinational corporations who publish, who are the publishers, who dominate publishers, whether it's Elsevier or Springer or, you know, all of them. They're all the same. They're all generating cash. And I mean, I put a comment about something David Harvey joked about, you know, in relation to publication. You know, he said, I'm an author. I was out of my office. I didn't have access to my collection of papers. Somebody wanted a paper. I had to pay 50 euros in order to buy my own paper from a publisher. And I got nothing from that other than kudos and the academic stuff. Not that I wanted anything from it, but why should anybody else be exploiting these huge profits? So the entire publication game, I think, warrants a little bit of scrutiny beyond this predatory space. Thanks.
No, thank you, Neil. I mean, I think that part of what has been wonderful about the presentation this morning and I want you all to join me in thanking all three of our presenters, is that they've actually stimulated a debate which goes far beyond pointing fingers and telling us not what to do, but actually has led to this really interesting and important, I think, discussion about what is research quality, what are ethical practices, and we do need to have deep and sustained engagement about these. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our allotted time for this, but there may be, during the Q&A after the next presentation, there may be time to circle back to some of these issues. So I'd like to thank all of our speakers very much, and everybody for your very lively participation.